Have you felt it lately? You know, that squeeze in the trucking market. That feeling that things are getting just a little bit tight, and finding a truck is way harder than it should be. Well, I'm here to tell you, it is not just a feeling. A capacity crunch is absolutely here. And in this explainer, we are going to break it all down. What it is, how we know it's happening right now, and what you can actually do about it. Alright, let's get into it. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the clues that prove a crunch is already underway. Then we'll dive into what capacity actually means. And hint, it's way more than just the number of trucks. Next up, we'll become market detectives and investigate 5 key signals. After that, we'll stack up all the reasons behind the crunch. And finally, we'll get really practical with a playbook for everybody. And I'll leave you with a super simple checklist, so you can spot the next one coming a mile away. Okay, let's just get straight to the headline, because this is so important. This is not a forecast. We're not talking about something way off in the future. The data right now is screaming that a capacity crunch is already happening. So let's look at the first pieces of hard evidence that show the market has completely flipped. But first, let's get on the same page. What even is a capacity crunch? You know, at its core, it's pretty simple. It's when there just aren't enough available trucks and drivers to move all the freight that needs to get moved. It's a classic supply and demand showdown, and it always leads to 2 things. Your service gets disrupted, and rates go through the roof. Now this right here, this is our first huge clue. We're looking at tender rejections. That's just the fancy way of saying how often carriers say, nope, not for that price to the contract freight they're offered. Well, that number recently shot up to over 13%. And to put that in perspective, anything over 7 or 8% tells you the market's heating up. Hitting 13%, that is a flashing red light that carriers have way better options. And you better believe they're taking them. And here's what happens next. It's cause and effect. When all those contract loads get turned down, they have to go somewhere, right? They flood the spot market, and boom, prices just explode. In just 6 weeks at the end of last year, the average spot rate jumped almost 19%. That wasn't a slow climb, folks. That was a rocket launch. And it shows just how fast this market can turn when capacity disappears. Which brings us to a really fundamental point. You see, to get what's happening, we have to change how we think about capacity. It is a massive mistake to believe it's just about how many physical trucks are out there on the road. The truth is way more complex and a lot more human. Think about it like this. Simple, but really powerful formula. True capacity is the sum of available trucks, plus available drivers, plus their willingness to actually haul your freight at today's rates. See, any one of those 3 things can change the entire market. Drivers leave, trucks get parked, or carriers just decide the money isn't worth it, and poof, capacity vanishes, even if not a single truck has left the road. Let that sink in. Okay, time to put on our detective hats. We are now going to dig into the evidence. The 5 critical market signals that are basically the fingerprints of a capacity crunch. Once you learn to read these, you'll be able to see the market turning long before anybody else does. So, signal number 1, and it is by far the most powerful, the tender rejection rate. I know we've talked about it, but it's so important, it's worth repeating. This is the canary in the coal mine. It's the best leading indicator we have for where this market is going, because it's measuring what carriers are doing right now in real time. When rejections go up, it means carriers are smelling blood in the water. They know there's better paying freight out there. And this just perfectly illustrates how massive the recent shift was. Around the holidays, rejection rates nearly doubled compared to the year before. I mean, think about that. They doubled. That's not just a little blip. That's a fundamental market shift, hitting levels we have not seen in more than 2 years. This tells us capacity didn't just get a little snug. It got tight fast. Signal number 2 is the spot rate. You can think of this as the market's instant thermometer. So if tender rejections tell you what's about to happen, spot rates tell you what's happening right this second. It's the price for a one-time load, and it reacts immediately to any little shift in supply and demand. So here's what you need to watch. There's almost always a gap, a nice cushion between spot rates and the lower contract rates. But when capacity gets tight, that cushion disappears. And recently, it shrank to just 26 cents a mile, the thinnest it's been in over 2 years. The takeaway here is really simple. When that gap gets this small, it means your contract rate is no longer enough to guarantee you a truck. Okay, on to our third signal, And this one is a real head-scratcher for a lot of people. You might be looking at the data and thinking, wait a minute, the total amount of stuff being shipped is actually down. So how on earth are prices going up? It seems impossible, right? Well, check this out. This data from the Cass Freight Index solves the puzzle, and it's fascinating. So in December, shipments were down 7.5% compared to last year. Total money spent on shipping expenditures was down less than 1%. Now, the only way that math can possibly work is if the cost to move each individual load went way up. This is stone-cold proof that the crunch is about the supply of trucks, not the demand for freight. So where did that supply go? Well, our fourth signal gives us a really stark answer. Revised government data showed a net loss of over 53,000 for-hire trucking jobs in just 3 months. That's not a guess or an estimate. That's a direct hit to the driver part of our capacity equation. These are people who have just left the market. And our fifth and final signal kind of puts it all into perspective. You see, this didn't just happen overnight. The industry has been bleeding for years in what people are calling the Great Freight Recession. I mean, just let these numbers sink in for a second. 88,000 trucking authorities gone in 1 year. Almost 10,000 carriers gone in just 6 months. Over 3,000 brokers shutting their doors. It's been a slow, painful purge that basically set the stage for the chaos we're seeing today. Okay, so we've seen the fingerprints. We've examined the clues. We know a crunch is here. So now for the billion-dollar question. Why? Why is this happening? To get the full picture, we need to stack up the causes into 2 buckets. The confirmed drivers, the things we know for a factor to blame, and then the likely contributors that are just adding fuel to the fire. Let's start with the facts. The number one cause, without a shadow of a doubt, is the super long freight recession that forced thousands of carriers to close up shop. Then, on top of that, you've got skyrocketing operating costs, insurance, repairs, you name it. Then you pile on that huge drop in driver employment we just talked about. And finally, when you throw normal stuff like holiday retail rushes or a big winter storm into a system that's already this weak, the whole thing just shatters. Now, what about the other factors? These things aren't the main cause, but they're absolutely making a bad situation worse. We're probably seeing some equipment contraction as the truck makers are being really careful about how many new trucks they build. We're also hearing that tougher regulations might be squeezing the driver pool. And of course, you have fleets themselves being really cautious, not wanting to buy new trucks because they're nervous about the economy. It all just adds more and more pressure. All right, we've diagnosed the problem inside and out. We know what's happening and we know why. So now let's get to the most important part. What in the world do you do about it? This is your playbook with real strategies, whether you're a shipper, a carrier, or a dispatcher. For all you owner-operators and small fleets out there, a crunch like this is a huge moment of decision. Do you play it safe with contract freight? You know, get that stable revenue, those consistent lanes, even if it means you miss out on the crazy high rates? Or do you roll the dice on the spot market? Chase those huge paydays, but risk getting totally burned when it all flips? Look, there's no one right answer. It really all comes down to your business, your numbers, and how much risk you're willing to take. Okay, for shippers and dispatchers, the game now is all about proactive defense. Shippers, you need to be stress testing your routing guides today. Find out where they're going to break and get your backup carriers lined up before it's an emergency. Dispatchers, you need to become obsessed with weekly tender rejection and spot right data. Know your lanes better than anyone. And for everybody, double, triple down on your carrier relationships. I'm telling you, in a tight market, a good relationship is worth more than gold. It's what actually gets your freight on a truck. All right, let's wrap this all up with something you can actually take with you. Think of this as your personal early warning system, a simple field guide to help you spot the next capacity crunch, all on your own, long before it becomes front-page news. It's a simple 3-part formula. 1. You see national tender rejections climb up and stay above that 8% warning track. 2. You see spot rates go up consistently for at least 2 weeks straight. And 3. You start hearing more and more news about carriers shutting their doors. If you see all 3 of those signals happening together, this is your key takeaway. Expect a major tightening of capacity to hit the whole market in the next 2 to 6 weeks. So, the final question really is, now that you know how to see it coming, what are you going to do to prepare?